Missiles and artillery, integral parts of many of Warhammer 2's armies. We're going to look at exactly how these ranged attacks work in terms of damage, range, and accuracy, as well as uncovering a few pretty nifty secrets that may actually change the way you use your missiles and artillery. So, let us begin. So, as you probably know, there's lots of different types of missile units and artillery in the game. We've got bow type units like these crossbows here. These tend to have a high arc of firing and can fire over infantry, hills, walls, but at the expense that arrows move quite slowly. And then we have gunpowder type weapons like these handgunners here, and they fire bullets which have a low trajectory and can have trouble with line of sight. But those bullets tend to be faster than arrows and are pretty much always armor piercing as well. You may have ranged units that are pretty explosive, like these grenade outriders. They'll have a decent firing arc, but it'll be very short range. But hey, it's explosive and that hurts. And then we have the same kind of thing in artillery units. The mortar has a nice high trajectory, but the missile travels slowly and is fairly inaccurate. But it'll do a lot of damage if it does land, including some explosion damage. Or you may have something like a cannon that functions similarly to the handgun. Has a low firing arc but travels fast and hits hard with armor piercing, and is typically more accurate than those high firing arc units. So how does the damage exactly work on all these different kinds of ranged weapons? So quite simply, it works the same as melee damage. You can see this if you scroll over the weapon damage on your missile attack, which will have a base damage and an armor piercing damage. In the case of these high elf archers, that is 16 base damage, which if you don't know, means that's damage that can be blocked by armor. It's a dice roll on how much damage you do. You might do 16 base damage, 9, 5, 2, or even 0 base damage potentially, with a higher chance of blocking more damage if a unit has a lot of armor on. And then you have the armor piercing damage, which cannot be blocked no matter how much armor you've got. So with every shot that lands on a model, it will do at least 3 damage guaranteed from a high elf archer, meaning that every shot fired from a high elf archer can do potentially 19 damage to any model it hits. Times that by the amount of elves in a unit, which is 68 on large unit sizes, meaning high elf archers can do 1292 damage potentially per volley. But that is basically impossible because that would mean that you hit 16 base damage every single time, no missile misses a target, and they don't get blocked by shields, which is pretty much impossible. But that's how missile damage works, right? That's how all missile units, handgunners, bows, artillery units as well, they all have base damage and AP damage that works exactly the same as melee damage. So that's fine, you have a basic understanding of how missile damage works, right? That's no secret though, you can see that on the unit card. But what about that explosive damage that you'll see sometimes if you scroll over missile strength, base explosive damage, armor piercing explosive damage. You'll see this on a lot of different kinds of artillery, the mortar, the Hellstorm rocket battery, the Hell cannon, the Screaming Skull catapult, flame cannons for the dwarfs, and on some infantry and cavalry units like those grenade outriders, deckhand bombers, miners with blasting charges. All these units have explosive damage, which works like this. Explosive projectile comes in, hits the ground, explodes, and then we have 2 circles. An innermost circle around the explosion. This is where maximum damage of the projectile is done. Anything caught in here is going to feel the full force of the projectile. So if a mortar round does 200 damage, anyone caught in that circle is going to take 200 damage each. The damage isn't split like splash attacks. Everybody in that circle has taken 200 damage. But it's not only those in that circle that take damage. Anyone outside of it in a certain radius will also take damage, but it'll be more damage that they take the closer they are to that inner circle. If they're on the edge of this second circle, they won't take as much damage as someone right next to the inner circle. But both will take less than somebody stuck in that inner circle. So basically, anyone in that inner circle is probably dead, and anything in close proximity to the blast is going to take a little bit of damage to some degree. So that's how explosive damage works. And of course there's base and armor piercing damage on that explosion, so performance can vary between different types of artillery. Now for another factor coming into effect on a lot of projectiles is penetration cap. How many models can a particular projectile go through dependent on the size of the entity it hits, infantry, cavalry, monsters, etc. The larger a model is, the harder it is for the projectile to penetrate through it, come out the other side and hit another model. This mostly just affects artillery. Let's take cannons for example. As you probably know, cannonballs are very large, very heavy and hit very hard. So naturally they have absolutely no problem penetrating through a good bunch of human-sized models. Cannonballs can even bounce once they've hit the ground to keep going to hit a few more as well, so they can fly through infantry no problem. They can penetrate that unit easy. So safe to say the penetration cap is quite high on infantry. But what about a big old cannonball again, going through trolls this time? How many trolls can it penetrate before it gets stopped? 1, 2, 3, and on the 4th you see it bounces off the troll because it can't penetrate any more models. 4 is the maximum for maybe monstrous infantry sized units. So we got one troll down there. This second one got hit but didn't get knocked down. He still would have taken the damage. This one went down, and then this one went down and went flying backwards, but it stopped at this one. As we can see, the cannonball bounced off that troll. So you can probably imagine what happens when you shoot something even larger like a giant. The cannonball simply bounces straight off after one hit. So it's not going to go through the giant and come out the other side and hit somebody else, because that would be a pretty ridiculous cannonball. Although it has done enough to knock this giant to the ground, the poor fella. So penetration cap is there. It's going to affect different artillery units in different ways, and is mostly affecting those low fire arc type units. Another cannonball comes in again, hits the giant right in the arse this time, bounces off, and apparently causes rectal bleeding. Jesus Christ. Just to do the same thing with a Hellblaster volley gun here, which is obviously not quite as powerful as a missile as the cannon, comes in high numbers instead though. These will penetrate infantry well enough, but when it comes to anything larger, cavalry or above, they simply bounce off. You see a projectile come in here, bounces off the first bore that it hits. So the penetration cap for shooting cavalry is 1 for a Hellblaster volley gun, which also means they won't be able to penetrate anything larger, most likely, like trolls or a giant. For the most part though, this doesn't really affect us, and you don't really need to change your targets or anything depending on the penetration cap. Artillery will usually do good work at whatever it shoots at. And of course on missile infantry, like normal sized arrows and handgunner bullets, those aren't penetrating anybody. No arrow is going to go through one man and into a second one, is it now? That would be a little bit ridiculous. So penetration cap is there, but it's not something that greatly affects us. But it will affect how much damage we might potentially do. So that's damage anyway. Let's move on now to the intricacies of range. As you know, all missile units and artillery have a little cone of vision like this, where when anything walks inside it, they'll be able to shoot at it. But this little cone harbors a deep dark secret that may actually affect how you choose to use your missile units. So what exactly is going on with that cone of vision? Well, here we have some Empire handgunners, and every individual man will have a little cone of vision that looks like this. You notice the cone is narrower towards the unit, and as it moves away it gets wider, and then at a certain point it gets even wider for some reason. This reason is a stat called Calibration Distance. This is the point in your missile or artillery unit's range where their chance to hit steeply declines. Naturally, when you shoot at something, it's easier to hit it when it's closer to you, so distance is always going to apply a penalty to your accuracy and your chance to hit, but that penalty is far greater after your unit's calibration distance. So in this case for handgunners, their max range is 145 and their calibration distance is 100. So after around 100 of range, they're going to start missing a lot more than they do below 100. The other part of this is calibration area. This is the predicted target area where your missile will land, potentially hitting a target. And like I just mentioned, closer to you at around 50 range, you're going to have a much smaller calibration area, meaning a higher chance of landing a shot. That will increase in size as you get further away, up to around the calibration distance where you'll still get a reasonable target area. But if we're to shoot at something right at the edge of our range, in the case of these handgunners at 145, we'll see the target area is considerably larger, meaning a much greater chance of missing. Now this is just a rough illustration, this isn't exact or anything, but you get the idea. When you're right at the edge of your range, you're going to miss a lot, compared to when you're around or below your calibration distance, and the closer you are to whatever you're shooting, the more hits you're going to land. So if something is stood point blank right in front of you, you're going to land most of your shots. Make sense? Here's some of your favorite missile units, their max ranges and calibration distances. Handgunners, Waywatchers, Sisters of Avalon, Jezzails, Deck Gunners, Dark Shards, and Chameleon Skinks. These are all their max ranges that we can see on the unit card. Here's what we can't see though, the calibration distance. When the unit starts shooting something past these numbers, the calibration distances, they start to miss a lot more than when they're below it. Most of these seem to sit around 55 to 65% of their max range. Some of them are better though. The Dark Shards, as you can see, 90 of 125. So their target area will stay relatively good for most of their range. whereas all the other ones will be dinging shots all over the place for about the last third of their range. And we can actually see this in action in-game. If you grab an artillery, hold down Alt so you can manually choose where to aim the artillery, you'll see a circle appear. This is the rough target area of where our projectiles will land. Watch what happens as we get further away though. The circle gets bigger. This is everything we just talked about in action. You can see the target area gets much bigger the farther away we get from that mortar. So the closer we are, the smaller the area is, increasing our chance of hitting, like here. Whereas if we move it away, we'll see it get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it is subtle, but you can see that it gets a little bit bigger faster as you get towards the end of the range. And if you sit there and watch where the projectiles land, depending on how big the circle is, you'll notice that they land pretty much in the area where it's shown. They don't land necessarily completely inside the circle, just around that area. They're not perfectly accurate, but you get the idea of what's happening here. When you shoot at things right at the edge of your range, you're going to miss way more than if you're considerably closer. This goes for artillery and missiles. Let's put it to the test then. Here I've got 3 units of Skaven Jezzails, shooting at Chaos Warriors with great weapons. This first unit is but about 20 meters in front of the Jezzails, so easy pickings for them. This second unit is at around the calibration distance of the Jezzails, roughly around the 150. And then the last unit is right at the edge of the Jezzail's range. This is where, in theory, you will miss a lot more than you do at around half of the range. So let's see what happens. We're going to let them fire and check every few volleys to see how things are going. First volley comes off. We'll wait till everyone's finished firing. The close unit not really missing any shots here at all, maybe landing all of them. There's the first volley done about now. Let's see how much damage they've done. This unit down to 7,100 health. This second unit down to 7,200 health, and the farthest away unit still at 7,300 health. So only about 100 health in it, but it's staying true to what we should expect. Second volley coming in now. Let's get a few volleys off. There's one more, 2 more, 1 more, 3. Let's let them finish. There we go. Okay, let's have a look now. So 3 more volleys. This is 4 volleys in total. 5,200 for the close unit, so they're hitting them well. 5,400 for the middle unit, and 5,800 for the farthest away unit. So that gap is getting bigger with the more volleys. Let's do a few more. 1 volley there. 2. 3 more. 4. 1 more. 5 more volleys. Let's have a look at the damage now. The health bars are looking quite different. The closest unit has 2,300 health left. The middle unit has 3,300 health left. So that's 1,000 different. And the farthest away unit still has 4,000 health. So that is quite substantial. There's a lot of ammo being wasted shooting at this farthest away unit. Nearly 2,000 damage worth of missed shots. So what can we learn from this? Well, the obvious answer is stop shooting at things that are right at the edge of your range. However, is that a good idea? Because then you don't get so much time to fire. But there it is. It's up to you what you do with that information. I think if it's a really expensive unit like Jezzails or Sisters of Avalon or Way Watchers, trying to get that little bit closer so you miss less is probably a good idea because that ammo is worth a lot, because it's powerful. If it's just a crappy unit of Goblin Archers, it probably doesn't matter so much. But up to you. One of the simplest ways to make use of this could be to take your powerful missile units, shooting at important enemy targets, and just try to move them closer sometimes. Even if it's only 20 or 30 meters, that could help you be way more accurate at landing hits on your target, albeit at the risk of safety, of course. Now to another couple of stats that affect all this calibration malarkey: accuracy and marksmanship bonus. Let's start with accuracy, which is often misconstrued and misunderstood. Accuracy is not a stat that determines how accurate a unit really is. That is mostly calibration distance and calibration area. Those two numbers determine how far and how accurate units are over their given distances. What accuracy does is it modifies those two base values, calibration area and calibration distance, effectively improving them and basically just making that little area smaller so you're more likely to hit your target through each point of the calibration, all the way up to your max range. We can see this in action in-game as well. The Dwarf Master Engineer, he has an ability, Ballistics Calibration, which increases accuracy and reload skill. Reload skill simply makes them reload faster, and accuracy will make their target area smaller, as we can once again see by holding Alt on an artillery. So here we have a couple of dwarf cannons. This one is currently being buffed by ballistics calibration, and if we look at the target area by holding Alt, we'll see it's very small. And as we move farther and farther away, it still stays pretty damn small because that accuracy is up. The calibration distance and the calibration area have been changed to give it a much better accuracy. And if you look at the normal one, well, you can see the difference. The circle is absolutely huge. This is the normal cannon versus a Master Engineer buffed cannon. So this is what accuracy skill does. It changes those two values. It's not the single stat that determines how accurate a unit is. Accuracy is just a property of the two calibrations. And the same thing happens if we add chevrons onto ranged units. Every chevron adds 3 points of accuracy to a ranged unit. So we'll see the same thing happening that we just saw happen with the dwarf cannons. These are Empire mortars. One is fully upgraded to rank 9. You can see the circle is really small up close, but that's going to be the case on both of them. So target area is nice and small up close, as you would expect. Better accuracy the closer something is, but as we move away and we look at the triple gold chevron version, that circle is still tiny, even a good distance away, whereas the unchevroned mortar has a much bigger zone, as we can see there. So the same thing is happening. The target area gets smaller overall with the more accuracy we add on, whether that's with abilities, whether that's with chevrons, ultimately increasing our chance of landing shots with our chosen ranged units. So that's what accuracy does. Marksmanship bonus basically does the same sort of thing. It's accuracy again, but it's inherent to the weapon that's being used. A bow, a musket, a cannon, the different weapons have their own different accuracies rather than the accuracy of the unit itself. So it's just another factor in the calculation on how small this little target area is. Honestly, it's even more complicated than this. There's a whole bunch of other stats that go into it. I don't fully understand it by any means, but all we need to know is that accuracy makes the target area smaller. Simple. Or is it? I got to wondering whether this accuracy improvement really does make a difference having that much smaller target area. So I did some testing in the only way I know how, by blowing up some dwarfs. So I've got 2 Empire mortars here, one completely unranked, just a normal mortar, and one triple gold chevroned up. We're going to blow up some dwarfs until these dwarfs reach us and see which one can do more damage. First volley's coming in. The rank 9 mortar lands its first few shots on the right, unranked on the left. Pretty similar performance on the first volley. Let's fast forward. This could take a while with their tiny legs. This is against the AI, so they're kind of trying to dodge it, but both units are doing that, so it's kind of fair, I guess. I'm going to run this a bunch of times as well, but we'll see how it ends up on this first run. Okay, we're out of volleys now, I think. Let's have a look at who did more damage. So we got 2,400 left for the dwarfs being shot by the ranked up mortar, and 2,700 for the ones being shot by the unranked mortar. So only a small difference in performance, a few hundred health. I ran this 3 or 4 times to see the difference, and this is another run. You can see they're both taking a fair amount of damage so far. Even though the ranked up mortar's target area is going to be much smaller, there didn't seem to be a great deal of difference in performance. Maybe this is just mortars being massively inaccurate generally, but the unranked mortar's target here down to 800 health, while the ranked up target's down to 1600 health. So the normal mortar performing better in this case. One more time then. In this one, the rank 9 mortar manages to break its units quite early, but this last volley's coming in for the unranked one here, and it does more damage again. 1200 left for the one being shot by the fancy mortar, and only 1000 health left for the dwarfs being shot by the unranked mortar. So it seems really hard to get conclusive evidence that that smaller target area is really making a big difference. So I thought maybe it's just the inaccuracy of mortars. Let's try it with something really accurate. Good old Jezzails. Let's have them shoot some unshielded dwarf warriors and see which one can do more damage. Again, I ran this test a bunch of times. I'm just going to show you this one though. You may notice that the ranked up Jezzails are firing a bit faster. They actually get off one more volley than the unranked version as well. I think they get 9 volleys to the 8 volleys of the normal one. So they get 1 extra volley over the unranked version, yet still they weren't able to do any more damage really than the unranked version. We'll give them 1 more volley here. Ranked up ones with their last volley. Unranked with their last volley. And we'll pause and let's look at the health. The dwarves on the right, shot by the ranked up Jezzails, down to 1800 health. And the dwarfs on the left, shot by the unranked Jezzails, 1800 health. Even with an extra volley. So it's hard to really say whether that accuracy from the chevrons is worth it. But this is a subject that will probably require some deeper investigation and testing. but I for one am skeptical of putting the money on chevrons to increase accuracy because I haven't really seen any great gains in performance. It still seems pretty hit or miss. Pun intended. Shields. Let's talk about shields. As you may or may not know, a bronze shield on a unit blocks 35% of missiles, potentially, and a silver shield will block 55% of missiles, potentially. This means if you shoot at these units with your missiles, there's a good chance you're going to be wasting a lot of ammo. But what angle of protection does the shield provide, and what kind of projectiles can it block? Can it block a cannonball? Can it block an arrow? Can it block a magic missile? Let's start with the angle. Shields will block 120 degrees in front of the wielder, giving them protection from the front and the kind of front sides. So if you shoot at shielded units from these angles, you will likely have your missiles blocked. But if you shoot them from directly behind, from the perpendicular side, or somewhere in between, you will not be affected by the shield at all, and all your missiles will land if they hit somebody. This is why you need to be careful of who you're shooting at with your missile units, especially if they're expensive units with powerful ammo. If you shoot at silver shielded units from the front, there's a good chance you're going to waste 60, 70, maybe 80% of your ammo, because 55% is going to get blocked by missiles potentially, and you're simply going to miss, so you're probably going to waste a hell of a lot of ammo basically. You'll be better finding a more vulnerable target or trying to flank around to get those missiles in the backs so that the shields don't come into play. But what kinds of projectiles can be blocked by shields? Well, it depends which category they fall into. These are the main categories: arrow, artillery, axe, grenade, javelin, miscellaneous, musket, or sling. Every single ranged unit will be put into one of these categories, affecting how their missile performs. And it is these three that cannot be blocked by shields: artillery, grenades, and miscellaneous ranged attacks. Artillery being mostly obvious artillery units, but also some infantry units like these Ushabti great bows. They fire a massive arrow, more like a ballista shot, so good luck trying to block that with a shield. Also things like the Skaven mortars and globadiers count as artillery. Grenades, fairly obvious, anything explosive, blasting charges, deckhand bombers, and miscellaneous is mostly magic and abilities. Magic missiles, the Arrow of Kurnus, Vindictive Glare, also breath attacks from dragons, vomit attacks from Throg or a river hag, any kind of ranged attack that doesn't really fit into any of these other categories. And all the other ones should be fairly self-explanatory, although some things can be a little bit weird, like Iron Drakes are classed as a musket, which seems odd, but where else do you put them? Nevertheless, it's useful to know which kinds of projectiles can be blocked by shields so you know where to use your ammo. And to finish off, here's a few other useful bits of miscellaneous info. Bonus versus large on ranged attacks. How does that work? Quite simply, it adds on damage to the ranged attack. You'll see a bonus versus large number, that'll be whacked onto missile strength. The same way it works in melee, except of course it won't affect melee attack because that doesn't come into play. High ground is important for missile units as it can actually increase damage up to a certain distance, making your missiles do up to 30% more damage with their missiles potentially. So always a good idea to look for that high ground with your missiles where possible. And here's a pretty cheeky little trick. Have you ever noticed how missile units, whether it's yours shooting at the enemy or the enemy shooting at you, sometimes they aim right for the very edge of the unit and only the edge of the unit for some reason. So you have an entire missile unit almost firing like down an alleyway at one particular point of the enemy unit. And the models at the other end of the unit are never really in any danger as no missiles ever come their way. They're all being aimed at this one edge of the unit. This is all to do with what the closest target is. Most units, not all but most, are programmed to shoot at whatever the closest target is, and that's every individual model. Here's a little test to show it. So we got one unit that is completely parallel to the unit that's firing at it. So the deck gunner should fire all over this unit, both edges, in the middle, everywhere. This middle unit is slightly off parallel. It's at a little bit of an angle to the deck gunners. And then the last unit is at even more of an angle to the deck gunners. What this is doing is putting forward a certain edge of the unit to make the deck gunner shoot at that particular edge. As you can see happening here by all the dead Phoenix Guard, the deck gunners are shooting this one edge that I have presented them, and nowhere else in the unit. This is because the gunner on the left and the gunner on the right, the closest enemy model to them is on the left side of this unit that I've put forward, so that's what they're aiming for. Whereas the parallel unit, the gunner on the left, his closest target model is on the right side of the Phoenix Guard, and opposite, Well, it's vice versa, and all the ones in the middle will shoot at the ones closest to them. So basically, every individual gunner in a unit will shoot at the closest target to them. If you put an angle forward, it makes them shoot at that edge. But why does this really matter? Well, because it seems to make a unit miss more. You could potentially waste more of the enemy ammo by being at a slight angle to them rather than parallel. The parallel unit has just gone down to about 3000 health, the middle slightly angled unit is at 3800, and the far more steeply angled unit is around 3400 health. And by the end of the test, the parallel unit is at 1100, the middle unit is at 3000 health, and the far unit is at around 2400 health. So it seems like a little sneaky trick to slightly angle your unit off parallel to the enemy unit shooting at you will make them miss more because they'll all be shooting at one edge. So this kind of angle seems to be the best. Parallel is where you take the most damage being face on to an enemy unit, and the far one being much more steeply angled is okay but not quite as good as the middle one. So you want to be slightly angled potentially to save yourself some damage. So just to reiterate, every individual missile model will shoot at the closest enemy model to the unit they're targeting. If the unit they're shooting is parallel to them, they'll all have different models closest to them, meaning they spread their damage across the entire unit. But if you're slightly angled, it makes those forward edge units the target for every missile unit because they're the closest ones, which ultimately seems to make missile units miss more when they're shooting at only one edge of a unit. A pretty sneaky trick that could waste some enemy ammo. So there you go. Some of the secrets of ranged attacks. Hopefully you found this useful, you learned something you maybe didn't know before. There's also some useful info on ammo in the What the Fuck is CP secret stat video, which I will link right now. I hope you've enjoyed this, thanks for watching, I will see you in the future.